2004 was an incredible year for gaming. World of Warcraft, Half-Life 2, GTA San Andreas, and The Sims 2 are few among the many timeless classics that all dropped in 2004, and a lesser-known title that I am going back to this Halloween is the original Painkiller. This is a wholesome and uplifting game, fun for the whole family, so you should definitely play it while your grandma watches. And now that all the wholesome gamers have clicked off this video and rushed to Steam to purchase the game, let's actually talk about one of the most harrowing and terrifying first-person shooter experiences that I've ever played. I believe that to this day this game has left me with irreparable night terror and sleep issues. I was about 5 years old when I first played Painkiller, and before you start clutching your pearls, let me remind you that kids today are exposed to horrors such as Cocomelon, so in retrospect it really wasn't all that bad. Today we're going to be taking a look at one of the most bizarre, unique, and terrifying first-person shooter games, the original Painkiller. Before we get started, hi, my name is Angelika, and I can't tell if it's dark because the days are getting shorter or if reading all of those Elder Scrolls has finally caught up to me, but I decided to decorate a little bit for the season that's in it. Please mention the bat. I put a lot of thought into its placement. So, what is Painkiller? Now, I knew this game wasn't overly popular, at least over here. I've never met anyone in Ireland that played the game, and if they have, it's because I told them to. I was even more surprised to find that the subreddit for this game was tiny, as it's got like 77 people in it, and the reason that this is so surprising is because the game is truly excellent. This is a Quake-esque Gothic-style first-person shooter with horror elements. It is an arena shooter where you're progressing through the map by moving through enclosed spaces and clearing hordes of enemies in each one to unlock the next space and make your way to the end. It was developed by Polish game devs called People Can Fly, and this was actually the first game that they ever put out. On this channel, we are lovers of details, ambience, and art, and amazingly, this game, for the particular genre that it's in, manages to excel in all of those elements. Before we really dig into the ambience, let's take a quick look at the background or storyline. The game follows protagonist Daniel Garner, who dies in a car crash alongside his wife at the very beginning. Instead of peacefully passing, he is sent to a demon-infested dimension between heaven and hell, where he is then tasked with killing the 4 generals of Lucifer's army to finally be able to enter heaven and be reunited with his wife. I've seen some people call this story cheesy or cliche, but I think that sometimes less is more, and having a simple, straightforward setup like this really allowed the developers to have a lot more freedom when it came to expanding on the ambience through creative and unique level and monster design. Ambience plays a huge part in level design here, and for that, every level is distinctive and hauntingly memorable. For the most part, there isn't a lot of focus on music in Painkiller. Instead, you will hear unique and specially designed ambient sounds. You will hear things like the wind whistling, unintelligible whispers, glitching lamps, crows, and if there is music, oftentimes it sounds like it's being played somewhere in your vicinity, off in the distance, as opposed to on top of the game like a normal soundtrack would. All of this combined really creates this sense of isolation and hopelessness, similar to what we talked about in Half-Life 2, but this time there is a more centered focus on traditional horror. It's effective in that it's really subtle and not always in your face, like sometimes when you're walking around, you may hear the sounds of a woman wailing or crying. In the cathedral, you'll hear sounds like really deep voices praying, there's an opera house level where you'll hear these ghostly vocals in a minor key. It isn't explicitly thrown in your face, but you can let your imagination fill in the gaps. Imagine the tortured souls trapped forever in this demon-infested opera house. Like I said, a really wholesome game. One of my favorite things about Painkiller is how this ambience only exists when you're wandering on your own without any of the monsters, and when the hordes are about to start spawning, the ambience is broken by heavy metal. This really takes you out of that frightening horror type scene and puts you in a Doom sort of mindset. Adrenaline rushing riffs combined with smooth gameplay, ragdoll physics, and the fast pace makes you feel like you're flying at times. And you might literally fly, like you can accidentally bounce off of objects and monsters, which feels almost like it's not supposed to be that way, but also it works. It's a sort of mechanic to be able to get to some unreachable places to unlock some secrets. A side note here, you might want to consider capping your frames at about 100, otherwise everything can get a bit chaotic. This might sound a bit strange, but I think that Painkiller is truly an example of video games being embraced as an art form. In its essence, it is just a mindless shooter with very little nuance, super fast-paced, and as long as you're shooting and blowing all the demons to pieces, you're likely on the right track. The developers really took this particular game concept and made it into something unique by giving lots of love and attention to the backdrop, to all of the levels, the monsters, and of course, the ambience. You really don't have to engage more than like 2.5 brain cells at a time while playing this game, but you will want to stop at times and just take in the levels as they are. The amount of detail for a game of this genre is crazy, and it's what keeps the game from getting boring after 2 or 3 levels of the exact same gameplay. You want to keep going to explore more of these places, and the variety is what will keep you going. The monsters, in my opinion, are very well done. First of all, you likely won't meet the same monster in another level, but if you do, you won't even notice with just how many new enemies are introduced each time to fit all of the different levels. And no, it isn't just retextured assets, it's individually designed, terrifying demonic creatures. I don't know if this happens to anyone else, but I get disappointed with a lot of horror films that choose like an easy cop-out, making a ghost that pretty much looks like a normal person be the main antagonist of a film. I want to see actual demonic, otherworldly creatures, real monsters, grotesque, creatures to have nightmares about. And you know, I think that Painkiller scratches that particular itch in a way that few other games have. Like, you do have some pretty generic ones like Zombie Warrior, which is just a skeleton in armor. Still pretty cool, by the way, but definitely a safe and more classic option. You can see the Slavic influence with the monsters like Banshee and the Witch. They remind me more of like Baba Yaga than a typical witch from like a Western fairy tale. Like, they don't have the pointy hat, but they do look like these really raggedy old women that definitely live in a house that has chicken feet. If you know, you know. One of my favorites is the Psycho Nun, really just because of how unique its design feels, making it so memorable. In general, I think all of the monsters are really well designed, from the typical skeletons that you would expect to the huge necrogiant that will surely trigger your megalophobia, which is a fear of large things. And I learned this term on TikTok like 2 days ago. If I were to compare these monsters to something, it's like the kind of stuff you might encounter in Diablo 1 and 2 or maybe some Souls games, but again, it is really unique to have this particular enemy design in a game of this genre. Speaking of Diablo and Souls games, going through the world in Painkiller a lot of times really does feel like a first-person version of those games. I haven't played a lot of Bloodborne or Dark Souls 2, but I imagine graveyards from those specific games in like a first-person view, and it would have a similar feel. Also, just a tiny connection, when you kill the monsters in Painkiller, they drop souls that you can collect. So Painkiller is essentially a Souls game. Confirmed. Then I would get real Diablo 2 vibes from the cathedral level. Like, if you were to have a first-person view in that game, this is probably really close to what it would look like, and it really matches up with that whole thing of having hordes and hordes of enemies to come at. Now, for the levels themselves, the early ones are quite heavy on religious imagery, which is a rather common trope in horror, where, you know, it's done in a way that churches, places of worship, altars, religious icons are all perceived in this really creepy and unsettling light, as opposed to symbols of faith and something good. And with that, I don't think Painkiller was ever supposed to be a super serious game. Like, there's a lot of elements of silliness to it with the ragdoll physics, the heavy metal, how fast-paced everything is, but the use of this religious imagery, the occasional wails of women, or a few notes on what sounds like a church organ in the ambience make it hit really hard. Because I experienced this game at such an early age, I was left with this particular impression of Western Christian churches. Like, I'd always feel a bit uneasy around them. And I'm sure that this is the case for a lot of people. Again, it's a really common trope, but it's just super interesting to see it implemented in a game like Painkiller. Aside from the hordes of enemies that approach you in these places, it's just the way these interiors are designed, how the ceiling feels infinite, the halls are exaggerated in size, and there's a couple of details around the place that are just horrifying. There are elements of this game that made me think that it couldn't be released today without getting absolutely obliterated by reviewers for something like a lack of diversity, which I disagree with, by the way. I think there's lots of representation for all sorts of demons here. But there are other controversial things about it, like the expansion, Battle Out of Hell, which is now sold together with the original Painkiller game, has a level set in an orphanage. I'm sure Grelod the Kind revisits this one frequently, and maybe when I myself was a kid playing this, I didn't think much of it, but now, as an adult, it's a bit unnerving to go through hordes of demon children. And it's really hard-hitting imagery also. Like, I get that they're all demons or whatever, but their voices are childlike, and there's toys and children's things everywhere. It's an orphanage. I can see that sort of thing coming under heavy fire were it released in 2024. Speaking of Battle Out of Hell, excellent expansion. Really expanding, get it? On everything that you would have liked about the original game. Lots of brand new levels, brand new monsters, unique settings, so not just a rehashing of the same old church-like settings, it really tries to be original and keep things as interesting as possible. And the setting every time will nail it with just how deep they go with a particular concept. Like, there is a level set at a fun fair, and if you have a fear of clowns and related themes, they make sure to fully explore it and leave you terrified as you're going through it. You really are in the hell version of each of these settings, which do appear to be kind of normal-ish settings from real life, but just in a different demonic dimensions. And, you know, it doesn't feel tired or like super cliche either. They do add elements to it that you wouldn't necessarily expect to keep you on your toes. In terms of gameplay, it plays really well. Now, I mentioned earlier that capping your frames is definitely a good idea to avoid a bit of a mess on the screen. I don't know what it is also, but personally I've had lots of issues with crashing across different PCs, by the way, and it'll come totally unexpected as well. Now, I don't think that it happens to everybody. I haven't seen a lot of information on that online myself, but I would recommend frequently saving. Luckily, the game does have an autosave feature, but just if you want to be closer to whatever point you left at, I would recommend saving as well. And often when it would crash, there were times when I would have to actually restart the whole computer. Like, the kind of crashing that I've experienced with this game where literally everything would freeze, and until I restart, I cannot do anything. This is a game where you have a lot of enemies coming at you super fast, and so I have personally experienced the occasional frame drops when they get really in my face and all start hitting me at the same time, but honestly, other than that, it does play really well. You will feel like you're flying, you're quite fast in it, and you don't run out of stamina or anything silly like that, so you can literally be unstoppable. When I went back to play this game just now to refresh my memory and film some content for this video, I honestly forgot just how overwhelming it can feel. Like, they're so fast. I felt super overstimulated going through the game again, but I was also absolutely locked in, like, proper, nothing happening up here, super close to the screen, not blinking, you know, you don't even notice how it gets you. It's kind of addictive, to be honest. Painkiller is one of those games that gets you as soon as you launch it, like right from the start when you see the menu, you will be immersed. And this is because the design of the menu, the UI in general, is very immersive. The sounds as you scroll through all the options. The sound when you click to go back. The background is like this worn parchment style, really fitting the whole angels and demons, heaven and hell vibe. Even the names of the difficulty settings are really cool. So there's 4 difficulty levels in total. The easiest is Daydream, then the normal or recommended difficulty is Insomnia, and after that you have Nightmare, and finally Trauma. You can actually get different endings in this game depending on the difficulty setting that you completed it at, and there are levels that are only available on the Trauma difficulty, so it has good replay value. One thing I really wasn't aware of until recently is that Painkiller is actually a series, and there's like 8 games in total. I looked into all of them, and honestly what I have found is that most of them are sort of expansions for the original game, but they're quite disappointing in that they bring nothing new to the table, they reuse the same assets from the original, and the level design in comparison is totally uninspired and just not great overall. The games are also quite glitchy, like there's a lot of gameplay issues, so I'm seeing that people that have played them are saying that they're vastly inferior and so not worth your time. This is probably because they weren't actually developed by People Can Fly. In fact, the last Painkiller game developed by them was the Battle Out of Hell expansion. Everything else they had no involvement in. There is one that perhaps stands out, and that would be Painkiller Hell and Damnation, which is at the same time a remake and a sequel. It's a remake in the sense that it is essentially all of the same levels from the original game, although some of them are missing for some reason, but it's a sequel in the way that they changed elements of the story which they portrayed through cinematics. The studio behind the game is also Polish, although I'm unsure if any of the original devs from People Can Fly participated in it. Overall, I think that Painkiller, the original, is a masterpiece. I know that when you compare it against games in the same genre that came after, there's better stuff out there, and in itself it was by no means super innovative or groundbreaking, but it has just enough of all of those things that I really like put together that it's definitely a game I frequently revisit to this day. I myself am not really a fan of shooters. Like, I am not really a Call of Duty girl, I never have been. The last Call of Duty that I played was Warzone, and that was only because my friends were playing it and it was fun because of that. But other than that, if I like a shooter, it's because for me there's something really special there. And you cannot deny that Painkiller just has something about it that makes it so weirdly charming. It's also just a super fun game to look at and appreciate as a piece of the past. I found this CD cover for the physical game in Russian, and it's like, Painkiller, крещённый кровью, baptized by blood. Like, it's so over the top and cheesy, but you have to appreciate it for what it is. There's sort of an innocence about it, which is really weird to say. There's a simplicity, which I really like. So if you have played it, this video is a sign that you should go back and replay it, and if you haven't, I personally really recommend it. I think it's a great game, and I will link it on Steam in the description of this video, if anybody does want to give it a try, just to make sure that you're definitely buying the good Painkiller and not one of those expansions that came after. And that about covers it for this video. If you enjoyed, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Thank you all once again for your continued support. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you all in the next video. Be seeing you. Bye!